Awesome. Okay, hey everyone. My name is Samara Trilling. I am a software engineer at Sidewalk Labs. I am also our accessibility lead. And so, for those of you who may not be as familiar, I guess, how many people know virtually what Sidewalk Labs does as a company? Wow, awesome. That is great. We're an urban innovation company, and our mission is to radically improve the quality of urban life. So this takes a bunch of different forms. These are the 6 pillars that we have sort of split into, with some examples of some of the initiatives that we've outlined. There's a bunch of information online about this. I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail. Sometimes it feels like we're trying to do everything. Sometimes it feels like we're not ever going to be able to do everything. So this is just a sampling of the work that we're doing. And our biggest project right now is we're working on designing, master planning, and creating a new district from scratch in the city of Toronto, which was a great tie-in from earlier. So this is an area on the waterfront, on the lake, and it's called Quayside, not Quayside or Quayside or anything else. But this is sort of an area that we're really looking into. What would it look like if you could start from scratch and build a district that took into account all of the best urban planning, transit, and technology innovations from the last 200 years or whenever the last time major city, uh, sort of new city projects were done, like the Gardner Expressway. That's this freeway here, which was built, much before we could think of anything like autonomous vehicles. And so, if you wanted to make sure that you could have a district that could incorporate all of these new ideas, what would that look like? So my work on accessibility really has centered around how do we involve the Toronto community in helping us co-create and co-design what this place is going to feel like. Obviously, you don't want something that feels like it's this sort of overlord who's decided what your neighborhood is going to feel like. And so one of the most rewarding parts of this experience for me as a software engineer was really getting to talk to people who would be users of the space and who had amazing ideas and who knew their own personal experiences and could speak to what they wanted to see in their new district. So our perspective really comes from a couple of different places. We really believe the accessibility community has driven technological innovation over time, and we want to create structures that legitimize and pay people for that work that they've done. That's an example of email. Any voice assistant you've ever used is largely, the technology was developed largely due to the advocacy of people from the accessibility community first. That's a debt that we as computer scientists owe, and it's really cool to get to sort of get back into that sort of exchange of ideas. This is really important. So in some places, we are considering integrating digital tools into city life, probably more so than we're all used to. And that means sometimes you're going to introduce a screen where there wasn't a screen before. For some people, that's awesome. For a lot of people, that's an extra barrier that you've added. And so unless you think from the beginning about how this is going to help people, how you're going to help people get through, if people use screen readers, how are you going to make it so that there's audio, visual, and tactile cues? You want to make sure that your technology is helping and not hurting. And yeah, we are starting from scratch, which is really exciting. We get to look at rerouting streets and street networks, which is really cool. So we can build an intentionally flexible city, and that involves everything from buildings that have fixtures at a bunch of different heights that you can change, to public realm furniture that you can move around, like the Bryant Park chairs is a great example of that. And then we really believe that designing from underrepresented and marginalized experiences makes the final product better for everyone. And this is often, called the curb cut effect. If you've ever, your suitcase up a curb cut or pushed a stroller, or there's plenty of cases where pedestrians go out of their way to use curb cuts, even though those were initially developed by and for people who use wheeled mobility devices. And then finally, co-designing with people with lived experience of disability and marginalization is the best way to create experiences that work for everyone, is what we believe. Cool. So who can give me an example of when you think about accessibility and transit, what's one of the first things that comes to mind? What are some examples of how accessibility and transit are required to work together, sometimes don't work together as well as they should. Yes. Elevators, subway elevators, great. Yep. Anything else? Sidewalks. Okay, so can you say more about that? Great. Yeah. So having a sidewalk makes it easier if it's paved for you to use wheels over, and also yeah makes it easy to access buildings. Absolutely. So these are some examples that people often sort of bring up. Elevators at subway stations, great one. Tactile paving at the sides of this transit platform here. Make sure that people know where the edge of the platform is. So if you're somebody who uses a white cane, or you can just detect that under your feet if you're looking at your phone, you can make sure you're not going to fall off the edge of the subway platform. Bus ramps is a great example. Surfaces that are friendly to service animals that don't get too cold or too hot or cut up their feet. There's a whole bunch of examples here. One that I think particularly excited about is the idea of accessible autonomous vehicles. We talk a lot about how autonomous vehicles are going to completely revolutionize the way that people get around and make it so much more possible for people to get around even if they don't currently drive. And that's awesome, but it's not going to be a revolution that works for everyone unless you have vehicles that are capable of being operated by folks who use wheel mobility devices, people who are blind or partially sighted, people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And so all of these are really awesome engineering challenges to make sure that you're, spreading out you have the biggest user population possible. This is a great video that actually is incredibly long. I highly recommend it if people are interested in learning about Toronto's subway. Toronto subway system. And this goes through literally every single accessibility feature of the Toronto subway system and bus systems and points out where they could be slightly better and where they're doing great already. This is David Lepofsky, who's a accessibility lawyer and activist in Canada. Cool. So this is a slide with a lot of words on it. This is all of the sort of groups, and this is not even an exhaustive list that we believe should be served by our accessibility work. And so you can see that there's, many sort of some groups have more visibility than others. You can see we have people who are deaf or part of the deaf community, people who are blind or partially sighted, people with color blindness, people with cognitive impairment, but also you'll see that includes people who have survived trauma, people who are experiencing PTSD, people who are experiencing chronic pain, which is actually the number one type of disability that people self-report, people who are neurodiverse or on the autism spectrum, people experiencing allergies. So this is a really broad definition that we believe can actually really help when you think about all the different ways that users are going to interact with your city, much broader than it would be for a normal technology product. Who here has heard about co-design before or heard of that as a topic? Okay, only a couple people. So what is co-design for accessibility? The process of co-design is the idea of actually brainstorming, workshopping, and creating solutions with the people who are ultimately going to use your product. So it's not just doing user testing and saying, hey, I built this thing, do you like it? It's actually saying, here's the problem that I'm facing as a software developer, or here's the problem that you're facing as a user. How can we harmonize and figure out a way to be able to generate ideas together to come to the best solution for everyone? So this is specifically ideas for inclusive, accessible city systems and workshopping with people who identify as part of the accessibility community. So this was my year last year. I spent 10% of my year last year in Toronto, and this was part of what we were working on. So we had 3 day-long co-design sessions and a hackathon, and we had 8 shorter embedded co-design sessions. We worked with the IDRC, which is the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University. And you can see the full summaries of the sessions. There's a lot of amazing information here at this link down here, and we'll send out the slides. It's cities.inclusivedesign.ca/blog. These are just some ideas of that we got from the co-design sessions that were pretty cool. So augmented reality park feedback. So you could leave a virtual caution cone so that people who were walking around the park could see that there was maybe a hazard that they wouldn't have realized there was before, or be able to report that something wasn't working, like a water fountain. The idea of autonomous vehicles for sub-emergency healthcare situations where you don't want to call an ambulance, but you don't drive and you need to be able to get to an urgent care center was a really popular one. And then tranquil refuge pods for relaxation for times when you're in a really stressful like social situation in a large group of people. Maybe it's outside, it's a festival, and you need to just be able to take 5 minutes and get away from the people in order to be able to truly enjoy your experience there. So we actually built prototypes of some of these. I'm going to keep going here in the hackathon, and we did I think 9 or 8 total prototypes. I think we're missing one here, but one of the other interesting ones here was rumble pavement. So one of the features that we're thinking about building with Sidewalk is the dynamic street, which allows you to change where the edge of the street is based upon if you have a street festival, if you want to be able to, you have a couple different scenarios that you want to be able to deploy on your street. And that requires that you don't have a curb where you normally would have a physical representation of where the edge of the street is, which is annoying for somebody who needs to be able to get up the curb and is using a wheeled mobility device, but is really useful if you're somebody who needs to be able to detect physically where the edge of a street is. And so one of the ideas we came up with here was actually being able to vibrate the pavement at a frequency that was not going to be obtrusive to people, but would still be detectable so that you could see where the edge of the street is. And you would be able to change which pavers vibrated based upon the scenario that you were setting up in your street. And there's many more ideas from the hackathon also online. And these were 2 public events that we held, the Open Sidewalk for the Accessible City, where we had a bunch of Canadian technology partners who do work in the accessibility tech space. And we also had a talk with 2 folks from Canada and one from the US who work on accessibility advocacy. These are some numbers. We spent 76 hours co-designing with 220 people. That's real in-depth. They attended a co-design session. We iterated on early drafts of these principles with 65 Torontonians with lived experience of disability and who work in accessibility. And we incorporated over 100 written recommendations for additions and changes. And so we ended up with 22 accessibility principles. So here they are. And the goal here is to sort of, this is the top line description of what the principle is. There's a whole bunch more that will go into how we apply these principles to all of our plans. So yeah, how are we doing on time here? Okay. Great, awesome. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I'm going to pull out a couple of the ones that relate to transit. So one of the biggest ones here is do nothing about us without us. This is really about involving people from the accessibility community at the beginning of the process, not just tacking accessibility on up to the end. So this was actually a big thing when they were designing Hudson Yards. I was talking with a group that consulted on the vessel, which you might notice has a lot of stairs. And figuring out how to make that an accessible experience for everybody and adding an elevator that doesn't look like it was just slapped on or is in the back is a really important thing. And that feeds into the idea here, which is that the accessible path should be the most convenient and the most delightful. So you're not having to go in some side door for the accessible entrance, and you actually have a first-class experience that allows you to fully experience the space the same way that everybody else does. And then we thought it was really important. Obviously, we are a technology company. We're also building something that's physical. We wanted to break up the physical and the digital a little bit here. So physical accessibility principles, one interesting one here is you can have something that you can enable personal assistive technologies that people already use, but you have to make sure that you're not assuming that everybody has a smartphone, because a lot of people don't, and especially folks who are part of the accessibility or disability communities often tend to be more strapped for cash than a lot of other folks because of sort of the way that our system works. So making sure that you can provide access to low-cost technologies and make your system work for people who don't have smartphones is really important. And then here, one that's really exciting to me is the idea of being able to preserve privacy and support fairness in machine learning. So this is something that you recognize that you want to make sure that everybody is equally represented in your training data sets. And that's something that requires having a large enough diversity of examples so that you're not just overfitting to a couple of people's experiences. The accessibility community is incredibly diverse, and you want to make sure that you're not just considering a couple of different people's experiences. And then finally, we're going to be, as I said, publishing more as we cooperate with government agencies, harmonize these with the existing codes that exist, and incorporating them into our plans and really showing our work and how these things are going to apply at the very granular level for our plans. And these are some references. This is a very text-heavy presentation, I recognize. Feel free to go back and check out the YouTube video and the Medium post, which is the blog post that we wrote about these accessibility principles, which is online now. Thanks so much.